it's demonstrated not only Ukraine's capacity to launch offensive operations, that wasn't a great surprise, but their capacity to do so and once again catch the Russians napping, quite frankly. They seem to have known that there was going to be a raid. They thought it was going to be just some little attack rather than this.
Now, dozens of Russian soldiers have been killed in a strike on a column of military trucks as Ukrainian troops extend their incursion across the border. Footage thought to have been shot in a village in the Kursk region shows 13 trucks by a road, several of which have been partly destroyed and are charred by fire. Ukrainian forces broke across the border into Russia on Tuesday in a shock counteroffensive after months of gradual Russian advances into eastern Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky has praised the Ukrainian military's efforts.
Everyone can see that the Ukrainian army knows how to surprise and knows how to achieve results. This is demonstrated by the battlefield, where our soldiers not only withstood the overwhelming force of the occupiers, but also are destroying it in the way necessary to protect Ukraine, our state and independence.
Well, Mark Galeotti is a security expert, often writes in the Sunday Times, chief executive for the consultancy Mayak Intelligence, and author of Putin's Wars from Chechnya to Ukraine and several other books on the subject. Mark, good afternoon to you.
Hello there.
What do you make of this Ukrainian incursion into Russian territory?
Well, this is an interesting thing. You called it an incursion, which is a useful sort of midway word between invasion and raid. This is clearly a very substantial operation. It's over 1,000 troops. They've managed to push, in some cases, tens of miles deep into Russian territory. Though, again, it's a very, very messy, unclear battlefield where there's probably a lot of interpenetration of troops and pockets of individuals caught behind the lines and such like. The key thing is it's demonstrated not only Ukraine's capacity to launch offensive operations, that wasn't a great surprise, but their capacity to do so and once again catch the Russians napping, quite frankly. They seem to have known that there was going to be a raid. They thought it was going to be just some little attack rather than this. The main problem is, though, we don't really know what the Ukrainian game plan is. Is this meant to actually hold and occupy territory? Is this meant to get a specific target like the Kursk nuclear power plant? Or is this more just generally to show that they can launch these kind of attacks and Russia cannot relax along its border?
Yeah, I mean, it is embarrassing, isn't it, for President Putin? I saw some footage last night of a group of Russian villagers in the area appealing to the Russian authorities to help them out. And that is clearly embarrassing for President Putin. How do you think he might respond?
Well, what he's already done is declared not just Kursk region, but a couple of other bordering regions to be now the center of what's called an anti-terrorist operation, which is basically a state of emergency. It allows greater powers for the government and so forth. But it's interesting he uses that phrase, an anti-terrorist operation. He's trying to play this down. He's trying to present this as just some raid. And clearly that won't wash. Even in the pretty supine Russian media, we're beginning to get what, by contemporary Russian standards, counts as almost dissident opinion. People saying, look, this is actually quite an impressive strike by the Ukrainians and such like. And on social media, it's a lot more inflammatory. So, it is clear that Putin's attempts to play this down just aren't going to wash.
And are you able to judge what Ukraine does intend to do next? I mean, is it going to try and hold on to that territory in order to prove to the Russian leader and his people that they can do that? Or do you think that those Ukrainian troops will simply be pulled out sometime soon before they suffer reprisals?
I mean, I know my job is to speak with absolute authority, but the truth of the matter is we don't know. And to a degree, I wouldn't be surprised if there's an element of playing it by ear also taking place by Kyiv. I would be surprised if the Ukrainians think that they can actually hold on to this territory long term. The point is, the Russian bear may be slow to move, but his jaws are very tough. Actually, the Russians do have additional reserves. They have conscripts they can use because they can't use them during the war inside Ukraine. So, give them time, and the Russians will be able to muster a formidable response. So, what we'll probably see is at some point a Ukrainian withdrawal. But the point is, they will have demonstrated that they can launch these attacks, and there's a large swath of Ukraine's northern border with Russia, which at the moment Russia has left almost undefended. In future, it's now going to have to maintain troops there, which is inevitably going to draw troops away from the rest of its military operations.
And of course, we've still got a lot of intensive fighting going on along that eastern front. And I mean, this is where we've had this conflict grinding on month after month. But if anything, the Russians appear to have been gaining at least some territory there.
They have been. They have been making advances. Again, slow ones, no sudden breakthroughs. But look, we have to keep this in context. This was always going to be the year that the Russians would have the advantage. More troops, more artillery, ammunition, and so forth. And so the question really was going to be, how much territory can they take this year before they culminate in the jargon? In other words, become exhausted. And look, they may well take another center or two. Chasiv, for example, is one city that they're clearly trying to aim at or whatever. But these are not war-winning gains. And it's almost certain that the Ukrainians will be in a much stronger position to once again launch a counterattack next year, now that more equipment, more ammunition is flowing in.
And how significant do you think could be that result of the US election? We've heard, of course, Donald Trump insisting that he's going to solve the war in 24 hours. A lot of concerns that that would mean an attempt to try and do some sort of deal or force the Ukrainians into some sort of deal to give up parts of their territory. His vice presidential running mate JD Vance in the past quoted as saying that he doesn't care about Ukraine. Do you think that there are real concerns, particularly in Ukraine, about the forthcoming US election, which could be very close indeed? And indeed, if Donald Trump were to return to the White House, what that would mean for Western support?
Absolutely. There's a lot of talking in Kyiv about this, even though no one wants to talk about it publicly because you don't want to further alienate Donald Trump in case he becomes president. I think that, first of all, we have to bear in mind that Donald Trump says a lot of things. He actually follows through on rather fewer. And it will be a very difficult and controversial move to essentially stop providing Ukraine with the support it has had so far in order to try and force it to make some kind of ugly peace deal with Russia. He will, I'm sure, want to end this conflict, but he may well find that it's actually rather harder than it is to actually just declare it on the campaign trail. But the very fact that there is, in effect, a clock ticking may also help explain why the Ukrainians have launched this particular attack, because they're trying to demonstrate that they're not the underdogs. They are not, in Donald Trump's kind of lexicon, losers. And therefore, I think they're trying to create as strong a position as possible, just in case Donald Trump does become president.
And just finally on that point, Mark, I mean, we did see at that big NATO summit a lot of talk about trying to Trump-proof support for Ukraine. And there are now commitments, aren't there, for significant amounts of weapons and other support that are already pledged to Ukraine for the coming months at least.
Yes, but this is the thing, it's for the coming months. I mean, there is, in practical terms, a limit to how far NATO, the assistance provided to Ukraine and so forth, can be genuinely Trump-proofed. The resistance that will come from Congress, and it will also come from people trying their personal touch with Donald Trump. I mean, it may well be that President Zelensky of Ukraine, who's often demonstrated him to be an astonishingly effective advocate for his country, may well actually be able to talk Trump round. So I think in this case, it's a massive issue of uncertainty. And from the Russians' point of view, look, I don't think they expect that Trump is going to be their guy. But on the other hand, what they benefit from is chaos, uncertainty, and division within the West. And their view is either Trump gets elected and he will be probably quite isolationist and certainly disruptive, or Trump loses what will, as you say, probably be a narrow election, and he and his supporters start sort of calling foul. And once again, America risks being plunged into disruption. So, from the Russians' point of view, I think they're thinking of this as a little bit of a win-win.
Mark Galeotti, Chief Executive of the consultancy Mayak Intelligence, author of Putin's Wars from Chechnya to Ukraine and many other excellent books. Really good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.